You're watching the Break It Down show, and I'm G. Michael Hopf.
That's right. Hey, I'm at Michael's house, Jeff's house. Yeah, he's also G. This G is Jeff, and he's a huge author. He has written just a zillion books and projects. He's been on the show before. We had him with Scott Husing, and we went over to Brian Dix's
Yep.
house, and we did a whole thing about his writing. So you definitely should check out that past episode. Brian Dix, also great episodes from him as well, and he is a unique individual. But let's talk about Jeff today. You took a break from writing. You're prolific and you write all the time. And you said, hey, I need to take a break. Let's talk a little bit about that break and what you figured out with it, and then where you got going after that.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on.
Of course.
And I know that was it in 2019. I think it was July of 2019. I remember that specifically when I was on the show last time. It was San Diego Comic-Con was downtown, and we were at Brian's house. And then I think Scott dropped me off down at downtown, and I kind of cruised around and checked everything out. By the way, that was a great show because we had three jarheads on.
That's right.
Nothing like having three Marines on, right?
Yeah.
And at that time I was promoting my latest post-apocalyptic novel, 7 Days. And right after that, I kind of just needed a break. That was my 37th book at the time.
Good grief.
That I'd put out. And I was a little kind of burned out, to say the least, and that was 37 books in a matter of like 8 years, 7 or 8 years. So yeah, prolific I am. And then after taking kind of a break, I was taking a break from writing, but I'm not a person that just kind of takes a break. I just don't stop working. I've always got ideas. And like your podcast, I'm a consumer of podcasts. I'm a consumer of information and great content like that. And one of those shows I was listening to a lot at the time was called Into the Fray. With Shannon LeGro, and it's about people's personal encounters in the paranormal and things like that. It's kind of an interest I've always had my whole life. And then I had this idea of what I now kind of call flipping content. So because of the way her podcast was, and it's built around people's personal stories, I reached out to her and I said, Shannon, why don't we go ahead and take some of your best episodes and we'll flip that into kind of the medium of a book. And she thought it was a great idea because people that are listening to podcasts don't necessarily read, and vice versa. And so it was like there's probably a whole audience that she was missing there. So she thought it was a brilliant idea. We worked together on it. We put out 2 books. One was called Beyond the Fray, Bigfoot. And then the other was Beyond the Fray, Paramalgamation, which is kind of a collection of stories that are just kind of unexplained phenomenon. And then when those books went out, a lot of her fans, but specifically a lot of prominent people in the paranormal world was like, this is great. How did you do this? I like to do this. And then that gave birth to Beyond the Fray Publishing. Shannon was like, hey, why don't we just publish these people's books for them? And so, boom, we did that. We launched that in early 2020. And to date, we've put out almost 70 books from other people.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're moving pretty quick, and very, very, very happy with that and how that's turned out. But then this past year, I've been getting that itch again, the itch to create and the itch to just get back at it and just be a writer, be a novelist again. And so I started writing again, and finally when I knew it, I was kind of dabbling with it, several different kind of concepts, several different plots and ideas. And then finally I came up with one, and actually 3 actually. And I put out a poll to fans and the readers, which one they wanted to see. And they essentially picked it. And it's called Cries of a Dying World. And that's one I'm finishing up on right now. And that'll be out January 17th of 2023, which is your birthday.
That's my birthday.
And so, but I'm excited about that. The plot essentially is there's a killer asteroid called Colossus coming our way. That's kind of it in a nutshell. But it's fun to be back creating. It's fun to be back kind of doing where my passion is. And I couldn't be happier.
When you look at changing gears and like refreshing your career, that's a pretty brave thing. Like, but also writing 30 plus almost 40 books in a what would be a short amount of time. If it took you 40 years to write 40 books, that would be a lot of books. I'd be prolific, but you're doing it in way less than 40 years. So I can see the need to take a break and refill the well. Plus, you don't want it to be drudgery. What you're doing is I know you want to create, but do you see yourself going back to that kind of pace? Or is it more important for you to work on these other projects that maybe are putting water back in the well at a rate faster than cranking out a novel every 90 to 100 days?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if I will be back at that pace. I'm just going to organically just write and see what happens. When I do write on really good days, I can pump out 7,000 words in a
Oh, wow.
day, and
Yeah.
it's pretty good. I mean,
Yeah.
there's clearly editing that needs to be done. This is just rough draft stuff.
Right.
But when I really get into the groove, I can do 5 to 7,000 words a day, 7 days a week. And you can see how quickly you can boom. Next thing you know, you have an 80,000 word novel sitting in front of you. I'm not putting any rigidity on kind of what I'm going to do. If the words are coming, I'm just going to let them flow. If the ideas are there, I'm just going to get them on paper. But I am working on some other projects at the same time. The publishing company is still going. I've taken a little bit of a step back from that. I'm still the managing partner of it.
Right.
But I'm definitely full-time as a writer again. But we were talking earlier before about movies.
Yeah.
Well, there is definitely interest in one of my Westerns to be adapted right now. So I'm actually having a meeting about that tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, that's neat. And when you get these meetings, you and I both, and we talked about this, it's one thing to get meetings, have a lot of interest in Hollywood, but on the interest level where they're like, we're going to buy something, like, and I mean, buy, option, and produce, right? Like, so optioning is different, but you have to compete with all of these scripts and a finite number of movies, even though, as you said, there's a lot more movies being made, but the script has to be the best thing they've read in all year. And there's a lot of really good screenwriters out there. So is you want to have things optioned, you want to have them made into movies, but it is very hard to get that pushed through, at least initially. And then it could be like, hey, we love everything Jeff writes. But that process is exasperating. I know from a lot of other writers. What are your thoughts on, is the juice worth the squeeze, or would you rather, and I'm not saying don't make a movie, don't have these meetings, but it's just, you've got to figure this out for yourself, right?
Well, I'm kind of doing it the way I did my books. And I first got started writing. I did find an agent. I was going to go the traditional route with the end, and I was having some creative issues with my agent at the time, and she's a wonderful person. And then so I fired her and then self-published it. So I wasn't going to wait around to get permission from one of the big 5 publishers or even a small publisher to do what I wanted to do. And I'm kind of a self-reliant individual anyway. Like, if I think I've got something good, I feel it. And we were talking about this beingness earlier, by the way, in our pre-interview conversation. I just knew that the book had something. I also knew there was something, again, going back to our previous conversations, something very authentic about it. Because it had been born from me searching for a book similar to that, and I couldn't find it. So therefore, then I decided just to write it. And because I've been down the road with movie options before on The End as well as Nemesis, and they've gone nowhere, like we were laughing about earlier, right? Meetings and then everything, like the people just vanish, like apparitions are gone, poof.
Right.
That this one I'm looking at doing completely differently. I'm just looking at producing it myself, having it filmed, putting it in a can, and going to a film festival. That's the direction I'm looking at going. So I'm actually that's just different. And instead of being beholden to a studio to create it and produce it, the meeting tomorrow is about securing money, and I'm confident that's going to be there. So I've already got some directors in mind, and I've already got some actors in mind. I've already spoken with them. And the book itself is fantastic. It definitely hits some of the points I know Hollywood's looking for right now. Strong female protagonist, something I know they've really been pushing a lot. You can see it in the content, we've had a lot lately over the past couple of years. So the book is the movie adaptation. It will be authentic to the books for those readers out there that have read it. I don't want to put out what it is right yet, which book it is, but it's going to be authentic, and to say it's got a strong female protagonist. And it's a Western, so people probably already figured out. And but I'm just going to do it myself.
Yeah.
And then sell it.
This is one of the avenues that we're fortunate to be able to have right now for a reasonable amount of money. And Westerns are, I don't want to say they're cheap, but they are not laden with a bunch of special effects.
Exactly.
You have a horse, you have some people, maybe an old town, and these things are actually available kind of guerrilla style, like in the indie film world. It's like, hey, there's a ghost town over here. No one even goes there. We're going to shoot 4 hours. We'll be gone, and so you can do these things for a reasonable amount of money. And then once you do, and you do take it on the circuit, then people are like, well, what would Jeff do if he had $10 million? And they can start thinking for you. So it is a great way to go. Why was it this book, the one that you're going to do now? Like, why this one instead of one of the other ones? Is the Western theme and the budget part of it, or what made you pick this book?
Well, I've always loved this particular book, and it's an award-winning book. It's a best-selling book too. And again, it's a great story. It really is. It's a great story, and it's a story that I think a lot of people can connect with. Mm-hmm. You got two main protagonists. One's an older guy. I'll just say the book is called Last Ride, and it's about an aging bounty hunter, and then kind of a protege, which he picks up is a young girl who ends up becoming kind of the first female bounty hunter in this fictional world. It takes place in Montana territory in the 1880s. So again, it's a story that a lot of people will be able to connect with. And I do think, I think people need to focus on what some of the studios are looking for too, and definitely hits those points. Abigail, which eventually I created a trilogy for her.
Right.
So this Last Ride is her origin story essentially, and then the next two books that follow are just all about her and what she's doing, her exploits and so forth like that as the first female bounty hunter. And I just think it hits a lot of what people are looking for today, specifically the studios.
Yeah, they're definitely looking for those those types of heroes. The non-traditional hero, right? And that there's a lot of movies in that vein. We were talking again. We had a pretty good conversation pre-show, and I'm reading about Cabeza de Vaca, who was this conquistador type character, and he really is in a. Well, I was saying like pre-apocalypse, where like you've come to the new world and nothing ever goes right, and your crew of people goes from 400. By the way, he wasn't even the boss, right? So he goes from 400 to 4. Surviving, and everybody like they drift off on rafts into the Gulf of Mexico. They're killed for fun by Indians, like all these impossible things. There is so much richness in our own history, and these are people that have written their journals, and so the notes are from them, and there's some performance in those notes because you're trying to abide a king and have the king not kill you as well. But all of these things we need to hear these stories because they're real, like they really happened. These people really did these amazing things. Do you draw from some of that stuff? And what are your thoughts on this pre-apocalypse world, like, and how hard it can be and playing in that world, just to kind of describe like, hey, when you show up on the shore of what might be Galveston in 150 years, but it's not right now, how do you survive?
Yeah, well, I get inspiration from all over the place. I pull inspiration just from the outside world and what I see. I do that with characters and how they interact. I pull that from people I interact with every day. But yeah, there's things you can pull from history. I know that story you were talking about him anyways. Yeah. Why is that not a movie already?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's not, it's like truly it's an odyssey. It's like an epic odyssey. Like that should be made. Where's Ridley Scott? Come on.
Yeah.
Right. And then, like we were talking too, like what is the apocalypse? Like for us in modern society, the apocalypse is losing everything we've come accustomed to that's been created in the industrial age. That just vanishes. Yeah. And the problem, the reason now, of course, people 150 years ago or 100 years ago could survive in a pre-industrial age. They had the skill sets. Right. It's the skill sets that separate us. Yeah. People have no idea. They have a lacking of skill set and a lacking of a mindset too. We're a very soft society in comparison to how people were. They were just much harder people, more resilient. They just and they didn't allow themselves to get bogged down in petty stuff to stop them. People, I mean, we can get into a whole societal philosophical conversation this could spin off to, but I just think that the reason an apocalypse would come now, if you just shut down all power, you got rid of everything that the industrial age has presented us, is people's panic and fear would set in, and they would just turn on each other because they don't know how to survive in that kind of world.
Right.
They don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I have skill sets and a mindset. I know you do, coming from your background.
Yeah.
Certain skill sets that I know would probably put you in a higher pecking order of survival.
Sure. Yeah.
but yet we still enjoy the conveniences of modern society. Here we are with lights, we've got a camera, but there's a refrigerator over there.
Yeah.
When you were coming down, you probably pulled over, you got a coffee somewhere.
Right.
There's drive-throughs, there's all these things. We go to grocery stores. I mean, I don't have a cow out there I'm milking, right?
Yeah, right,
I mean, like I know how to kill an animal, I know how to dress an animal, I know how to, produce kind of the body parts and turn that into the meat that we can consume. But the fact is that most people don't even know how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you remove all those things, it becomes, so what is an apocalyptic world to someone in the pre-industrial age? I don't know if there is one in some sense, because they were living when you had plagues and pestilence and wars. And I mean, those were common for people back then.
Absolutely. And all of these things, Cabeza de Vaca encounters. And it's crazy because he makes a decision that he thinks is best in the time. And the guy next to him makes what probably is in that moment the smarter decision, except for he dies, and like there's this whole thing where a whole bunch of them they get better and they're going to move. And there's a lot of people and they're okay, we're going to move on. We're going to get out of here and try to get to the next thing. They all die, and the guy who's sick and barely surviving, this guy, Vaca Cabeza guy, he can't move because he's physically unwell. And then he rests and everything else. He develops a market. So he's enslaved by these Indians. And he realizes that if he travels between this group and that group and he finds what's valuable to them and he brings it, he unenslaves himself. They're like, hey, you're bringing things to us we can't get anywhere else. So his European sensibility with markets and trade allows him to not only survive, but start to thrive in this area because he knows where these other items are and he can transport them, and he starts to gain free passage that he wouldn't have otherwise because he has become valuable. And it just blows your mind. And you talk about like our ability to adapt to that. I read a lot of Laura Ingalls Wilder books. I just find them fascinating, and like, hey, we need a new mattress. We're going to buy some ticking and we're going to fill it full of hay. We're going to hand sew it. We would lose our minds if we had to do that. We try to do everything. I mean, your house is wonderful, right? But this isn't possible if you're doing everything yourself or having to trade your time to do, like just our niceness shrinks, right? Because sure, you can dress an animal. Maybe you become a butcher or a hunter, but you also can't be a wheelwright and all these other things because there's just not enough time in the day.
Well, those people also, but they don't realize what they've lost because they've not had what we have either. So for them, life is wonderful in some regards. Like if they want a new mattress, they know what they need to do. For us, we want a new mattress. We go shopping online.
Right.
Maybe we go to a store and we pick one out after laying on it and have it, and then have it delivered, and someone else puts it in its place.
Yeah.
So that's what we know. That's our base of knowledge. But if you were to go back to Ingalls' time, that's all they knew.
Yeah.
They didn't know about, maybe some people in higher society had other people produce things for them, but the common person, the lay person, their life wasn't like that. You made your own clothing, you made your own mattresses, you did all those things yourself, but they didn't really know about life any other way.
Yeah, it's crazy. Even simple things like access to water, clothing. If your clothing rots and goes away, and there's no cotton mill, there's no nothing. You have to figure something out. And a lot of these tribes, they were naked because it was warm enough. And why would you make a shirt? They just didn't need it. And that's a complete adaptation for this Christ-fearing, European person. Is like, no, we wear clothes because we have some dignity and we have some shame and all these things, but not in this world, right? And so clothing is secondary, and you don't have as many tools, and you don't have draft animals, and so you are the draft animal. It just blows my mind when you think about all of the things that we have access to, and the comforts that it brings, and we're still not happy.
Yeah, but that's a mindset thing. When you're talking about like how he adapted to his situation and made himself valuable,
right?
Then and that, by the way, there is a lesson in that for anyone even in the modern age. You want to create, you want to be an entrepreneur or business owner, or even if you're working for somebody and you want to elevate yourself in that corporate environment, be of value.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Don't bitch and complain. Make yourself indispensable. Make yourself like, where's Bob? We need him.
Right.
That's so that's what he did. He adapted. That's a mindset thing.
Yeah.
And this is where I think the concept, I think we talked about in the interview in 2019, and I kind of, created what I call the 4 pillars of survival. And that is kind of, mindset is one of those, right? You have skill sets, right? You have resources, mindset though is definitely a big part of being able to survive. And then fitness and capability is the other kind of, is the fourth one. But mindset is, I think, the most important. You can have somebody that is in a conventional sense disabled, but yet they can survive because of their mindset. You can take a lot of this, you can take resources away, you can take skill set away, and you could put someone at a physical disadvantage. But if they have the mindset to survive and adapt, they typically can overcome. So this is why the power of the mind is critical in every aspect. And I think in today's world, we find a society that isn't just weakened physically. You can see that displayed out. Let's look at the military recruitment, right? How hard they're having a hard time recruiting people, right? And that's just on the basis of physical capability. And then you roll in just kind of where we're weaker in just our mindset, the things that people allow to paralyze them. Words now terrify people. A word. Well, I mean, that is, to me, mind blowing. That's mind blowing. How can a word paralyze you?
Right.
You're choosing to allow that word to do that. It's a choice, by the way. This is the concept of, like, when people say that they're offended. Well, there are things that we know in society that are even just in human interaction that are offensive, right?
Right.
But just because something's offensive doesn't mean we have to be offended by it. Being offended is a choice. So someone could say a word and you could get offended and I don't get offended. So what does that mean? It means it's subjective.
Yeah.
Right. But people today, their mindset is so weak. We've elevated victimhood to a kind of a status that's very high, that people thrive to be victims. And that mindset is detrimental to survival, I think, ultimately. And then I think there's also a spiritual deficit that's happening in people too. They're looking toward objects and things versus, God and what else and this is why there's this void, I think, a lot of people's lives, and the high levels of suicide and depression and things are playing out. So our society, I think, while we have all these achievements, we've degraded ourselves in some regard too. We've lost contact with nature. We've lost a connection to where we've come from, right? And I think it's incumbent upon us. I think, by the way, I'm not a Luddite. I mean, I'm all about modern advances in medicine and luxuries. I'm all about it. But I think it would be wonderful if people can still have that connection to where we came from.
Yeah.
How these things are made.
Yeah.
And I think they'll be stronger, and to let go of this victim mentality that paralyzes them, because they're allowing themselves to be paralyzed by words or someone else's actions. And someone that has that mindset today would never survive in a pre-industrial world.
Right.
They couldn't.
Yeah.
If they go to Starbucks and they get upset that there's no foam on their cappuccino, and they're losing their shit over that, right?
Yeah.
There's no way they'll survive in a world like, now you have to make your own mattress. What?
Yeah. And you don't want to say that the good old days were better or anything, but if your cappuccino doesn't have enough foam on it and you start to berate a fellow person in your community, in the right on time, you might take a whooping or worse for that. You're not going to talk to me that way, and so there is some civility that you don't have to have. And your thing on faith is interesting to me because, we understand that there's a lot of ways to worship now. It doesn't have to be this God or that God or any God. It can be a lot of things, but you do need, I believe, in terms of your spirit and your, I don't want to say faith because I think that's too restrictive, but to hold yourself spiritually accountable, you need something in front of you. It can't just be this nebulous universe. I'm giving it up to the universe, right? But how do you, if you don't have a God to fear or a guide on how do I become a better person? Like if you're not reading the philosophers or you're not, how do you know where to go? Or are you just trying to be the best person you can? And then in what circumstances? Because it's easy to think you're a great person, and it turns out you're an asshole half the time, because we're all assholes half the time.
Yeah.
But you lose sight of that because you don't have a guide, you don't have a set of directions. And if you don't like the Bible, or you don't like the Quran, or you don't like, any religious text, then we've lost those guides. We've lost those boundaries. We lost those directions because a lot of this stuff has been figured out already.
Yeah,
And
I
so
agree. Yeah.
we're really just trying to master something that's already been presented.
No, I would agree with that. Like, this is something I've been kind of on my own spiritual awakening this past year, and diving into whether it's the Stoics, whether it's, these are ancient wisdoms. That's
Right.
probably a better word. These wisdoms are found in the Bible. They're found in the Quran of just how to live a life
Right.
that's fruitful and fulfilling.
Yeah.
Right. And Marcus Aurelius was talking about this. Seneca was talking about it thousands of years ago. Plato. These men weren't Christian. They had pluralistic gods, but yet they still had basic principles and to live by. And if you practice these principles, your life is pretty good for the most part.
Right.
And a lot of them focused on the mind. You find it just if you were to pull up a Bible app and you type in mind, you'll be shocked at how often it comes up, and how often whether it's Jesus or even in the Old Testament, but in the scriptures, and where they're talking about the mind. Paul talks about the mind quite a bit.
Yeah.
And capturing thoughts and turning those thoughts around. Right. So they know how powerful then our mind is.
Yeah.
And to allow our mind to be polluted by negativity, which then corrupts our inner talking within ourselves, which then we're polluting our subconscious mind. And again, the Stoics talked about it. It's in all ancient wisdom and ancient texts. This isn't new age stuff. This has been around for thousands and thousands of years. And there's something there. If people it keeps being brought up again and again, it's because it's true. It's true. And I think there is a loss of some of that, I think. And now there is a large community that people that are either spiritual, and again, without going into any kind of religion specifically, that are spiritual and are in touch with that and are kind of awakening to these subjects and these principles. But there is definitely a deficit. And I think it's like when you have a rate of suicide like we see, not just in the veteran community, it's everywhere within teens.
Yeah.
A lot with teen boys and men. Like something's wrong. Something's not right. What's happening there? What's happening with that subgroup of individuals that they don't think that their life is worthy to live? So what's playing out there?
Yeah, and we are toxifying male traits, and we're looking at the pressure we put on kids. Now, look, some kid living in the 1850s, 1550s, 13, they need things to do. And who knows, maybe those kids were smoking themselves all the time or whatever. But we haven't mastered that. We do have a mental health problem here in America specifically, but that isn't represented in other places. Is that because it's not discoverable? Okay, maybe. Is it because the devil has work for idle hands? Maybe. But we work these kids hard. It's like, hey, you come home and you put on your gear and you go to the game and you practice the game, and then you come back and then you do your homework, and then and then you do your community it's like, damn, these kids have 80-hour weeks, and so I think that breaks a kid in some way. And yet farm kid, 80-hour week, and they were able to manage that. Maybe that's my perception. But what do you think about that? Like, the pressure that we apply on ourselves and then also transmit to our kids, like making a better version of ourselves, but you don't reliably know if you can do that. And really, genes are saying you can't.
Yeah.
You can't reliably change your kid because your genes, your significant other's genes, the people around them, there's no room left for a parent to positively create the thing that they want to create in their kid. You run out of space.
Well, that comes into the thing as we can't control anyone outside of us anyway. And that's that frustration that people have.
Right.
I've had it.
Yeah.
I dealt with it earlier in this year and last year, was trying to control outcomes. And the fact is, like, I can't. It's like this light bulb went off in my head, and this epiphany is like, what am I doing? The only thing I can control is myself and my emotional response to anything. And if I want somebody, if someone's actions or some things are happening around me and I want them to change, the only thing I can do is change myself and be an inspiration for somebody.
Yeah.
I think it's better to inspire people, and then they see that, but they still have to make the choice and choose into whatever that directional changes in their life. We can't force people to do anything, including our children. The best thing we do is instill them with values and principles and inspire them.
Yeah, I had the DOC. He's one of the guys from the NWA crew. He's one of the three pillars. His writing of raps was really one of the things that set them apart. And he's roughly our age, and he said that it took him decades to learn. And one of his girlfriends, Erica Badu, was his girlfriend, and he realizes like all this stuff I'm carrying around doesn't belong to me. All these weights, these emotions. So he's like, it's not mine. I'm not going to carry it. Put it down. And he's like, my life changed.
Look how fast that happened too, right?
Right.
So I mean, there's all these stories. I think I did a post on it. And I didn't publish it, but I was going to do a post on storytelling, and I always fashion myself as a storyteller, right? I write books, I tell stories. But actually, every single person that's ever been alive, that's alive today, and will be alive in the future, are storytellers. We tell ourselves stories all the time. This is a story right now. I'm telling stories. You're telling stories, and there'll be people watching us tell stories. So we're either in our day, or all 24 hours of it, we're either consuming stories from other people, whether it's books, podcasts, movies, or we're telling our own story, or we're listening to someone else's story. Our entire existence is stories, and dreams themselves are also stories that are playing on our head. So everything is a story. So what story are you telling yourself about yourself?
Yeah.
And do you believe other people's stories about you? How do you allow that to affect you? Again, everything we enter into is a choice. So this is like the concept of a story, like, oh, I'm going to go to therapy because I've got this baggage I'm carrying on from my childhood, and it's going to take me 6 months to a year to get over it. Well, that's a story. Who came up with the timeline of 6 months to a year?
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Right.
Or you go, I'm going to get over this right away, and you gone.
Yeah.
So what is that?
Yeah.
I think the power of the mind is we can change in an instant. We have to choose it, make that conscious, intentional choice, and then believe it, and then stick to it. Not to say there won't be challenges and things that pop up, but you be the author of your own life.
Yeah.
And write that story, and then believe that story.
You don't get to control outcomes though, right? So you could say, I'm going to change. Like for me, like I do mental health stuff every week. My appointment's next Wednesday. It's about every 2 weeks. I struggle with PTSD, and I keep the D in there because it is a disorder for me. It's gotten better, but it's remained, right? And so I have to battle it, and it's like going to the gym. I have to do this work. So it's not an outcome I would have chosen. I'm not going to ever have to do that. Like, no, it's part of who I am now. And maybe one day I won't have to, but I've got to constantly take care of my mental well-being as part of who I've been, right? And so I've put down a lot of those things. I have improved. I recalibrated what's normal, because when you live in a combat world, normal is not normal, right? So there isn't a lot of control. It's not as much control as we want on an outcome. I'm going to write a book and become a best-selling author. Maybe, but you can rip your heart out, and then you can be crushed because it doesn't happen. But maybe it's 7 books in that you become notable and not even a bestseller. And then maybe by book 10, you get there, or maybe you never get there. Maybe you realize I need to be an agent, because that's actually where I need to be. So the outcome, I think, is important to be loose with that. Within a zone. Maybe.
I would agree with that. I to a certain extent, I think that we have more of an influence over the outcomes of things in our life, positive and negative, more than we think we do.
Okay.
And that's just an opinion I have and a belief I have. I've looked at my own life like intently. It is funny, like when you look at there's always this kind of stereotype of military people, right? And you've had it where we're just a bunch of knuckle draggers. We're not thinkers, and we're kind of this myopic, kind of monolithic kind of being that exists, and we all think exactly the same, and we're not that smart. But actually, I find that most vets that I've known and that I've met after are very deep thinkers. They've experienced things that most people have never experienced nor will experience, and they actually achieve quite a bit in navigating the world and living and thriving in the world after those experiences. Some don't. Some, unfortunately, check out.
Yeah.
But I find that there's something about the introspection, and I've done a lot of it in my life, a lot. Just thinking about, like, how did that happen? How did this happen? How did that happen? When something good happens, did I contribute to that? And taking the ownership of it. And even when something shitty happens, like, okay, what was my hand in that? Because even though it kind of came at me, so say something just comes at you, then you get to choose how you respond to that, right?
Right.
You like, am I gonna, resist it? Am I gonna come after it? I'm gonna take it, whatever you're still choosing. So there's a point where you have to take ownership of it, even when something shitty happens.
Right.
That's surprisingly out of your control. Bam, you're hit with it. Then from that moment on, you own it. And you have to take ownership. I think Jocko talks about that in his wonderful book about extreme ownership.
Right.
I think when someone takes extreme ownership of their lives, they're then in a constant state of reflection and how they can grow and how they can be better.
Yeah.
And I always encourage people to take as much ownership of everything that happens in their life, the good and the bad, the yin and the yang, the sweet and the sour.
Yeah.
But I've looked back in my life and I was like, oh, that shitty thing happened. Yeah. I traced the roots back, like, oh yeah, right there. I made that decision, which then led me on this kind of timeline that I intersected with that person. So I did make a choice 6 months before that put me in front of that individual or put me in that circumstance. And then it's not 100% ownership, but I'll go, there's 5% ownership.
Yeah.
Why did I make that choice to go down that road? I thought it was going to be okay. I thought things were going to work out, but I still had this, the angel on my shoulder was like, that's not a good idea what you're doing there. You know that, right?
Yeah.
That's not a good idea. And then 6 months later, it manifests itself into something shitty.
Yeah.
So,
and also simultaneously,
I hope that makes sense, by the way.
I think it makes sense. And also something good. You're like, hey, this shitty thing happened because of my mistakes, but also look at this opportunity.
Yeah.
I met Dave in the coffee shop on my way there and everything else. So there's that. When you talk about the whole extreme ownership and being responsible, we tend to sanctify our actions, right? And if you wind back your tape on that decision that you make, anything that happens on this show, it's my fault. Anything. If you're a bad guest, I was a bad host. If the equipment doesn't work, I haven't had enough foresight. I haven't planned ahead enough. Now, look, crazy things are going to happen. It is a reality, but it's on me to limit those things. And so I have to own those things, even if your performance is fantastic, but even if your performance was not what I wanted, it has to be me. So what did I miss? What decision did I make? And then you start to realize, gosh, I probably make a lot of decisions that are wrong or not as accurate as they could be. And you have to spend time, not like overanalyzing and not like being afraid to act, but you have to allow yourself to be wrong, heck, a lot more than you even are capable of realizing.
Yeah, because failure always leads to success anyway. Every person that's been uber successful.
Yeah.
Sorry to jump in on
No, you're good. I want you to do
it. Is failure. Before there's one massive success, there's probably 100 failures along the way. But it's the mindset. They don't get paralyzed by the failure. They look at the failure. It's a challenge.
Right.
What does the word challenge mean? It means it's just going to be a little bit more difficult. It's a test. I think that's the actual definition. It's a test.
Right.
Or can you pass the test? If you believe you can, then you'll be fine.
Right.
Like, oh, it's a test. I can overcome this. I can do this. Boom. Mindset. It's a mindset thing. And boom, you go over and you learn something. Like we were talking about the Stoics a little bit ago. The Stoics, the Stoics didn't believe in shame and regret. Right. So this is the thing about ownership. When you take ownership, you then don't pile a bunch of guilt on yourself. Right. You don't pile a bunch of shame and regret. No, that's wasted negative energy. And the Stoics knew it. Like, no, you put that aside. You objectively look at what happened. How much ownership did you have of that circumstance? Learn from it. Use it as an opportunity to grow. And then forget about it. It's done. Like, there's no guilt. There's no shame. There's no regret. It's just something that happened. Yeah. We all make mistakes, and how we embrace the mistake is important. Like I've told my daughters, like I'm more concerned of how they respond if they fail the test than if they failed the test. Like I want them, because I love seeing how their little brains are working. They fail a test, like, okay, let's talk about it. What happened? Let's diagnose the problem here. Like, why did you fail? Well, I've guided them and like don't give me a bullshit excuse.
Right. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. No, like, what happened? Well, I didn't study. Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's fair. You didn't study. It's clear you didn't study because you failed. So what are you going to do next time? I'm going to study more. Okay, this is how you have a problem. Yeah. You diagnose it. You fix it to prevent it from happening again. Yeah. Right.
The next step in that process is, okay, you're gonna study. That's the how you're gonna fix it. Now, how are you gonna build in more studying time? Yeah. What does that look like? And what's like when people talk to me about like, hey, I want to do podcasts, and I'm like, everybody wants to do a podcast. But can you? I mean, and you look like 1,500 plus episodes, right, of the stuff I've created.
That's impressive, man.
Yeah, right. And so what I'm giving advice, I'm not giving advice from a point of not knowing. I'm not saying here's what you need to do without the experience of doing it. Like you have to accept that it's going to take you 10 hours an episode until you get efficient, which you can't do. It's like I always say it's like learning how to swim. I can tell you, here is how you do the Australian crawl. Now, this may not work for you because you're a middle-aged person and you may have to find a different stroke, but I'll explain now to you the steps of swimming. And now we've finished that process and time to jump in the pool. Yep. And you're going to be like, I don't know how to swim. And I'm like, I just taught you. Right. So podcasting and a lot of things, writing a book's got to be the same way. It's like, I can give you all this stuff, but ultimately it's you fingers on keys.
Yep.
So there's that how piece, and then dissect it. And you don't want to get so granular that you don't get anything done, but you do need to understand the steps to add in this capacity. Like, yeah, okay, obvious. Like, okay, so when we have like a problem in society, like we had a problem with police or a problem with teachers. You hear these crazy stories about crazy teachers, and someone will say, well, they need more training. Okay, well, I'm positive the training person and the training budget are maxed out. There's not a lot of capacity there. So you can say that. And then what are you going to train on? I'm a big believer in we've lost these modern wars because we were ill-trained. So our training is hyper-focused on lethality, but we weren't fighting a war that was going to be won with lethality. I'm not saying you lose lethality, but you have to pair off some of that lethality capability to add in the capability to actually advance towards a stable Iraq or a stable Afghanistan, because we sucked at that for a lack of training, right? And so those how questions, I think, are made from a wise, experienced mind. It's like, okay, great, yeah, you're going to become an author. All right, how are you going to do that? I mean, I know you can probably write 100 words right now, but can you write 5,000 a day? Well, you can't start writing not 5,000 good words. So how do you make that mountain? How do you build that capacity? That's, my kid wanted to become a doctor, Brenna, right? And I'm like, hey, doctors study differently than you do. So at some point, your study habits and your outcome are going to have to get into agreement.
Yeah, well, I know we were talking about it earlier too. Is there's when I get asked about how do I become a writer, and I've always just tell people to dive right in. I don't believe in overanalyzing stuff. I know we were talking about taking ownership, and then I do go in introspection and look at kind of how I dealt with something, but I don't spend a tremendous amount of time, so much time that it bogs me down, it paralyzes me. I'll spend what I think is a fair amount of time looking at it, and I come to a conclusion fairly quickly, but also giving myself permission that I might make a mistake again, and then I just go about my way. And I think that's helped me in my life. About when there's something that I want, there's something I want to do, I will look at it just enough, and then I'll just take a deep dive into it. And the reason I don't hyperanalyze things is because I know myself, and I think it's important too. People need to know themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know because I know that what I'll do is I'll use it to stop what I want to do, because you're looking at a goal. You're looking at, say, I want to be an author. I want to produce a movie. Yeah. I want to, whatever you want to be a doctor. That's a steep hill to climb. Right. Right. But here's the thing. I'll look back and go, well, a lot of other people have done it. So it's possible. Yeah. This isn't breaking new ground here. Right. Am I capable? Of course I'm capable. Am I worthy? Yeah, I'm worthy. Okay, so what do I need to do? I just need to put some words on the page. I need to have a good story. Okay, I think I can do that. And what I don't do, and I know I mentioned this in 2019, is I don't get bogged down, because I think fear is representative, like where people will then they'll put obstacles in their own way. Well, before I can write a book, I need to go back to college. Yeah, I need to get a degree in creative writing. Right. Well, shit. Now you just put 2 years or a year or whatever in front of you before you can even put a word on the page. Why? Yeah. Because I guarantee you there's tens of thousands of authors that never went to college. I didn't go to college. Right. And so what is that? And the thing is just doing it, taking it, I think there's some little due diligence should be done, but then just do it. And when you're doing it, be it. I mean, you you have the thought, and then just actually go forward and be the writer, or be the podcaster, be the movie producer. Clearly with being a doctor, I think you should have that mindset. You are a doctor, and then you go to get the actual technical skills to be one. Sure. But in your mind, you already are a doctor. Yeah. You're already telling yourself, I'm a doctor, and then you go forth to get those technical skills.
there are a lot of types of authors. There's a lot of things you can write about.
Mm,
So you may
good point.
start with, I'm going to be an author. And it turns out what you're going to be is a very successful technical writer.
Yeah.
So you make money and they're like, well, what the hell is a technical writer? It turns out I can take complex processes and I can explain them in 4,000 words or less, how to work this impossible machine or how to do whatever. I thought I was going to write fiction, right? We had one of the ladies who worked on Grey's Anatomy, and she worked on Shameless and a bunch of other things. Her name's Krista Vernoff. And she's like, I want to be a comedy writer. It turns out I'm a serious drama writer. And there's nothing I can do to change that. I want to be other things. I want to sing. I used to sing on, this is her talking. I used to sing on like dining cruises. And I want to do that. But what I get to do is this incredible work. And she had to reckon with that because you don't get to control your outcome. So you go out and you decide, I'm going to be a runner. Maybe you're not going to be David Goggins. You read his book and you're like, oh, I can't wait to become an ultra marathoner. But it does turn out that you're a pretty damn good 5K runner or whatever it is, right? You have to get into the mix and start doing the thing that you want to be. Yeah. A lot of kinds of doctors, right?
Yeah.
But you have to be willing to allow the lessons that are coming at you to inform who you're going to be. I can follow a formula and I can make a YouTube channel that will have hundreds of thousands of clicks on it all the time. But I have to surrender my creativity to that process. And that's something I'm not willing to do. I understand that now. And I'm like, I can get mad about it. I can fight it, but I don't want to make something that's banal from my point of view. Right.
Yeah. You brought up a good point. I've got a funny story about David Goggins. Yeah, he's amazing. And I definitely don't drop as many F-bombs as he does. I probably used to back in the day, but it's a funny thing for him. Was it 2020? No, 2019. Oh yeah, actually almost not that, like November of the, like we had the interview in July, then that November I hurt my back.
Oh, okay.
And I was at the same time, I was watching a lot of David Goggins stuff. I was like, I thought, I'm going to stretch the hell out of this. Yeah. I'm going to stretch and stretch like David did. I'm going to just, this is my PT. So I'm like, I freaking herniated my disc because of that. It's like, thanks, Dave. Anyway, by the way, I'm so grateful for the VA system, by the way.
Right.
I truly, like, it helped me. They were amazing. And then come February, I had spinal surgery. So it was really good. Like it was bad. I had a microdiscectomy, but the herniation was horrible. Like debilitating. I was like disabled for like months. But anyway, thanks, Dave. He's one of a kind.
Yeah. You have said the word introspection. And one of the things I've realized personally is you have to consider all of the specs: retrospection, introspection, perspective, prospect, inspect, respect, all of these things. And they seem to kind of run in pairs or in triplets where, like, okay, so one of the things I learned trying to do spy work, right, is I have the commander's point of view and mission behind me, and I'm looking for that. And then when I flip the camera around and I see the farmer, how he sees this thing coming at him, I'm like, oh my God, we are no way, like, we're not doing what we think we're doing. And that may not seem sexy, like I'm looking for nuclear bombs, but I am telling the commander, like, hey, this ain't working. You got all these guys lined up on this hill. And, as a spy, my job is to tell you, there's nothing over there to fight. The fight actually is over here. And so when you have these things, when you look at the different perspective and all of these things, introspection, you have to be able to see things from different points of view.
Perception.
Yeah, perception. Right?
And that's what the farmer was giving. It was his perception.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you develop that as an author, as an artist? I had Andy Summers from the Police on the show. And I said, who's in front of you artistically? Like, because you get way out there, you get weird. And he's like, nobody. My job is to be further ahead in my area than anybody else. That's my job. And I'm comfortable being out there. And so nobody can do more of me than what I'm doing. And then everything else behind me is for everybody else to worry about.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We were talking before about just being authentic. And I think that's something we have to do is, there's technical skills we need to learn. Or you clearly need to have, whether you're a podcaster, whether you're writing, whether you're technical of writing or writing a novel. There's technical aspects of writing a novel, by the way. But at the end of it, you like I was having this. I was interviewing. Or when I say interview, I was had this Instagram live chat with this new author, and he was asking me if when I'm writing the book, will I write it to appease to people and things like I know I don't do that because now I'm not thinking creatively.
Right.
If I've got this analytical thought, like I need to make sure that I hit all these kind of talking points in the book, like, well, then I'm doing battle with my creative side. And I said, this is where the authenticity of a novelist, you just tell your story, whatever that story is, and it's your perspective. It's how you see the world. And you can try to, and you can have the character try to see it in their own way, but then it's still your perception of how someone that thinks like that would see the world.
Yeah.
Right. You're still very much kind of the God in that universe, overseeing it. And I think you can't cloud yourself with, I wonder if I should make this character this to appeal to a publisher. No, I think you don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think having a lack of authenticity gets picked up by people. And I think you just got to be yourself, be true to yourself and tell the story you want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also, what was the point I want to make? I can't think of it right now. I'll come back to it.
Let me ask you this. You're talking about being true to yourself and authentic and not doing things to appease the audience. But you have in this interview said Hollywood wants strong female heroes.
Yeah.
So how do you know the market but not appease it? Because there's like a gap in there and there's a balance, like all things, there's a balancing act.
Well, when I wrote Last Ride, I wanted that character to exist. And so out of the 39 books that I have now, Cries of a Dying World is a book I'm writing now. Will be my 40th book. Pretty happy about that.
Awesome. Yeah.
When the idea of coming of one Last Ride is done commercially well,
right,
won an award, it's done really well. And so when I was looking, so it's a great book regardless, but it does hit those points of what Holly was looking for too.
Yeah.
So these two things just happen to intersect.
Right.
I didn't deliberately go in and change Last Ride. And the adaptation and the screenplay that's being drafted right now, like, no, let's make it was a young boy. Let's make him a young girl. I didn't do that. I didn't let's change his ethnicity. No, none of that happened. So the story is exactly how I wrote it. It just happens to coincide with what Holly was looking for right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I am attuned to that, but I'm not changing anything in the story. So it's still the same authentic story I wrote 2017 or 2018, something like that. And it's still that same story. It just happens like boop, hits it checks a lot of the boxes of what they're looking for.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And you can be a person who writes to what the market wants and be successful. I think Aerosmith did a lot of this in the mid 90s, like their song like Crying and all of those songs from like the Permanent Vacation album to Pump or so, they really got formulaic. But also, when you look, you're like, these are still great songs. I still love them.
Yeah.
And so they were poppy, but goddamn,
they're good.
They're really good at writing a pop song, and it no longer to me feels because they've got history to them and they've remained good songs. So sure, they were right on top of the market, but there's something to be said for being able to pop right on top of the market.
But they were also still authentic to who they were, though.
Okay.
So it was still them, don't you think? It was still very much, Steve Tyler, right?
Yeah.
It's still, it was still them.
Yeah.
Like even when I look at the Westerns, like the Westerns I've written, I definitely followed a formula with them too. They're very kind of like Zane Grey, like Louis L'Amour. There's no cursing in any of them because I understand the audience. So, but yet it's still my authentic voice and the story, the way I tell the story is still there.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope there's a nuance to like abandoning kind of your own voice to give way to something else. I think that's picked up by people. Again, I think we were talking about, hey, how does one become successful? Like, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I do know. I mean, we actually do know. I think consistency is a big part of things. Like never giving up. But consistency, most people's dreams are on the other side of consistency. You just keep going at it. And eventually things you talk to this, that, all these things, all these dots connect, and all of a sudden, bam, you get noticed. And look how long it took for Rogan's podcast to go anywhere.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, like forever.
And we'll just use my podcast as an example. It has been varying levels of successful, because podcast people check in for a while, then they check out. And maybe I don't give them what they want on the day that they're looking for something, because my show is very wide and rangy, like Joe Rogan's podcast. I don't have a national audience like he does to rely on everything else. but there's so much value in my podcast. This is one of the things I've had to adapt and learn about. I get to know you. I get to come to your house. We get to do this, and opportunities have come from that, where I introduced you to Jeff Calhoun, you know, and who knows if something happens from that, but that's valuable. Being able to be a node, to be able to pull on this thing and talk to this person. I get to, I've not said this publicly yet, and I don't know if it'll happen, but my show is big enough and provides enough opportunity that I get to pitch Anne Margaret being on the show. I mean, that's Anne Margaret, you know.
Yeah.
Like, and if you don't know who Anne Margaret is, type in the words Anne and Margaret, and it's going to be the first 1,500 things that you see, because she's an icon, right? And so just the fact that my show created that, there's value in that. It's up to me to figure out how to turn that value into something that I can realize.
Well, but you wouldn't have been able to have that had you not been consistent.
Right.
So the consistency plays a part.
Yeah.
People are sometimes, you know, like Napoleon Hill talks about, he gives an illustration of the person where he's digging for gold, and the one person just doesn't quit and eventually hits the main vein. The other person gives up. They give themselves a time period like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, then what were you really seeking when you were doing it? Were you doing it for fame?
Yeah.
Or were you doing it because you wanted to provide quality content?
Right.
And those are two different things.
Sure.
If you're doing it, if your purpose, this is the same thing with authors. It's like, are you trying to be the bestseller? Everyone wants to be a bestseller.
Yeah.
Of course, who doesn't?
Right.
But is that your intention behind it?
Yeah.
Or is the intention to bring readers an incredible, engaging story?
Yeah.
Because then your focus is, when you're writing it, I want to deliver this value to people. I want to deliver them entertainment. I want to deliver them a moment of time that they can escape from the world and read this fun, engaging story. So if your intention is to provide quality, or whatever that is, money typically and success flows to that eventually with consistency.
Right.
If your whole goal, and people will quit if they're looking for fame, if that's their goal, then maybe some people can hit it. Nothing's 100%, but those people, they don't hit it and they quit. They pull up anchor and they're gone, because that's what they were looking for. They weren't looking to deliver something of quality to their fellow human being.
Yeah.
They were doing it for selfish reasons.
As a guy that writes, this will be like my last big thing, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about that after that. But as a guy who writes about Armageddons, what is right now the most likely real life Armageddon scenario? We've had pandemics. We've got potential for nuclear war with Russia. We've got an asteroid we just bullseyed. You know, I don't know if you saw, but in the news 2 days before NASA bullseyed that thing, they're like, we shot a rifle 4 miles and hit a big old piece of iron. They're like, you're adorable. They shot an asteroid that's like, 500,000 miles from here and nailed it, right?
Yeah.
So there's all these things that potentially could go wrong. Maybe a piece of that asteroid comes on in, and who knows, 20 years from now, who knows what happens. But what's the most likely apocalyptic scenario that you can see that could happen?
I think today, well, yeah, I mean, it is a very unstable world. The thing about nuclear war is, it's mutually assured destruction. I think during the Cold War, we dealt with a lot of that. And I think, I don't know who said it, but I think the Russians love their children just as much as we do.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that could actually come to pass, but of course it could. I mean, I don't know, but I think everything is computerized. Everything's the internet of something. And I think malware, hacking, cyber stuff is probably the biggest threat we have right now. Of course, disrupting the world. And of course, we were talking, you disrupt modern conveniences, you create an apocalyptic event, because people don't know how to survive. They don't have the skill sets and knowledge and mindset to survive in the world if the lights go out. So if they were to manage through malware attacks to shut down the grid, you only have to shut it down for 3 to 4, 6 weeks. You've got mayhem and chaos spilling into the streets. Most people do. I mean, what is it? There's a saying where we're 9 days away from, people losing their minds.
It's so true. We're going to be moving towards a lot more electric cars, and that in a lot of ways is a good thing. Here's the thing. That Tesla that you own, you don't truly own. There's some software agreements required. And there's some things where it's like, hey, lights out, you don't get to have your car anymore. You're like, what are you talking about?
Of course. How else does it get updates?
Right.
If it's getting updates, it's connected to the outside world. If it's connected to the outside world, someone can get into it.
Yeah. And it may be someone, it could be nefarious. It could be the company. And we've seen that with like these vindictive attacks that are politically motivated for software companies like PayPal. And heck, I mean, everybody says get on Patreon. Hey, take a look at Patreon's behavior. and what they will do to your audience if they don't agree with you politically. Like, it's terrifying, right?
Mhm.
So you have all this software, and we're even more than ever before dependent upon electricity, generated from something that we don't control. Now, maybe
Mhm.
if you have your own solar panels and all that kind of thing, but even then, here in California, if you plug in, you have to like sever your tie with the electrical company. Otherwise, you're going to have some kind of agreement on what you're allowed to do. Like, it's crazy. Our demand for electricity has only gone up in a world that we're trying to manage our energy, and we just crave. I think, and I don't know if you agree with this, I think our nighttime sky here is even brighter than ever with all of these LED lights. And so you look up, I'm like, I can barely see like the planets, and that's it. Like, not even a star peeps through, because we're taking an LED lights use less energy, but there's just so much, like, there's so many of it. There's just that much more energy being shot into space even. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts about consumption of energy and everything?
Well, we need energy.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, I know there's the anti, or the, what do you want to say it, like the anti-energy movement, or
Right.
pro-climate people, and I think a lot of them are kind of, I used the word Luddite before. Luddite is someone who doesn't like modern conveniences.
Right.
And you look at some of these people, and we need energy. Our world, the way we have it today, needs energy. So we need to get it from somewhere.
Yeah.
And in order to create the energy, something's being destroyed, by the way.
Yeah.
The solar panels I have on my house, or
Yeah.
those wonderful batteries that Elon's got in his cars and all those other companies now.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the carbon footprint of creating those batteries, people.
Yeah.
So you got nothing. Energy is not created without some natural resource being tapped, and there's destruction or change or alteration or pollution that comes from it.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of special interest groups that are all about solar panels and these lithium batteries, but the fact of the matter is they're big polluters too. They really are. And those batteries only last a certain period of time. And where those batteries go, where do the solar panels go?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we want to have the life we have.
Yeah.
We've earned it. I mean, as a society, as a species, we've gotten here. There's no reason why we need to go backwards. I think we can have progress. I think we can be smarter about it. I'm a big proponent of the new nuclear stuff. I think that nuclear energy is the future. It is how we do it. You can have whole communities, a PUD created, and the reactor is the size of a box.
Right.
And it takes care of the energy for 1,000 years for 10,000 homes.
Right.
And it's encased in cement. So then when it dies, it's already in its encasement.
Yeah.
It's done. Yeah. And there's so many people that don't want to do that. And I wonder if it's either we're talking about training or education. Is it really a lack of education, or is it they're part of a special interest group? Because no, they're not they're not going to make money from nuclear.
Yeah.
So, but they're making money because they've got stocks or bonds, or they're interested, a special interest in solar panels.
Yeah.
Or batteries, electric cars. I mean, I think the energy is, we're definitely in a war of energy, and there's all these people. And I just think I'd laugh when I see people like, oh, it's clean because it's on you know how many coal power plants are fueling your car, bro?
Yeah.
It's like, let's just be real. I just want to have honest conversation about energy. And we say we're in a drought, yet we sit on the biggest body of water. It's the crazy, like, you were talking about your mind blown. Like, wait, no, we don't have to, we don't need to take a step back.
Yeah.
We can create industries that are clean, as relatively clean as we can make them with our technology, and still provide the same quality of life we've always had. There's no reason to have blackouts, brownouts, to restrict our water consumption when we've got an ocean right there, but yet they won't permit a desalination plant.
Right.
I don't understand it.
Yeah.
Like,
or whatever, or we won't allow water reclamation.
Because
we're grossed out by drinking what water the astronauts drink.
It took forever. Like, I remember, was it when we first moved back? When I first moved back to San Diego from Idaho, I was like, I should get a gray water system put in.
Yeah.
It was against the law.
Yeah.
I was like, I said, wait a minute, we're a drought environment.
Yeah.
Like, there's droughts here. This is a semi-arid desert.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean we can't use gray water?
Right.
No. So there were people like guerrilla gray water systems being put in. Now it's illegal in the city of San Diego to have gray water systems. But
tell us what a gray water system is, because people don't know, like white.
Oh, so it's taking, so essentially a gray water system is taking water from that's used for your sink or dishwasher, not your toilet, but your sinks and things like that, putting it in, and it goes through like a level of filtration, and then it's repurposed, not necessarily for consumption, but for irrigation and things along those lines. But you do see some of that now when you look around. If you see I'm not sure where it is in Orange County, but I know here in San Diego, if you see like an irrigation system and the cap is purple, that's reclaimed water. So they've reclaimed the water, they put it through a certain level of purification or filtration, and then they reuse it just strictly for irrigation, which is smart.
Yeah.
And like we should be doing that for every household should be built with a gray water system.
Right.
Why are we wasting water? If water is such a precious resource, like in Frank Herbert's Dune, I mean, there's a people that are resilient. They're like, oh, we're going to create a suit. Remember, you've seen probably the movie or read the books, and they use their sweat, right? And they repurpose that. Like we should be repurposing as many things as possible in our society, even if we don't have the need for it, just because it's smart.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not be responsible stewards of the planet? But there's no reason why we have to have water restrictions when we sit on the largest body of water.
Yeah.
It's insane to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no nuclear plants. Why do we not have nuclear plants?
Oh, don't drive me crazy with the nuclear plant thing. I do not understand it. If Pete was president, I'd say, let's lean on our petrochemical, aka organic energy supply that we have, and let's tax that to transition over to nuclear energy. I know it's going to take a couple of decades to do, but we can do this. And then also, can't just add more people to an area just because people want to live there. Like my dad lives in Capitola, Santa Cruz area. Yeah. It is clinging on to the edge of a mountain in an earthquake place that gets tsunami. It is a hard place to survive. And you have a UC there that's now at 20,000 students. It's a massive hunk of the population. You can't just keep putting more dorms up and bringing more people to this area. Sometime we got to go east, and that's got to be okay. And you can visit the coast or whatever. And it's not, you can't make the coast affordable because it's the damn coast, And so we lose track of these things that are manageable because we can't get along long enough to deal with. We have in California here, I've had a guy talk about the water wars, and you have the farmers, you have the conservationists, you have the preservationists, you have all these different people, and they can't agree on things like, we're going to raise the level of this dam. We've agreed to do it. We've allotted money for it, but we can't do it because it gets tied up in court. It's like, so now we're not going to use the resources we have in a smart, clean way. And we'll do things like, we haven't done this, but we'll make alfalfa growing illegal in California, or we won't grow almonds anymore. Well, some other less fortunate place is going to have to grow those almonds because there's still a market for it, and it'll just be done less cleanly. And so we're actually contributing. It's like this stupid war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. It's an environmental disaster. You know how it is. Like, there's going to be diesel on the ground. I mean, junk left everywhere, rotting poison everywhere. And so you want to improve. I love saying the same thing, the steward of the earth. Knock that shit off.
Yeah.
Don't apply pressure to make that war stop.
Well, and then when we talk about like the people that are against petrochemicals and the oil and things like that, so we don't want to drill our own.
Yeah.
Yet we'll go and this isn't. But I'm talking just from an environmental aspect. We then will go, okay, well, let's get oil from Venezuela, and I guarantee the way they drill for oil is nowhere as environmental as the way we do it.
Right.
So we're concerned about the environment. So the same amount of oil is going to be burned whether you like it or not. So you're not stopping the consumption. The consumption is happening. It just depends on where you're getting it from.
Yeah.
And now we're getting it from sources that don't have the environmental regulations and guidelines that we have. It's the opposite. They're creating the opposite effect.
Right.
The oil is still being consumed. The oil is still being drilled.
Yeah.
It's now just dirtier oil.
Right.
And like this is, and the thing about nuclear, we could go like that quick.
Yeah.
We could make that happen quick and overnight. And you don't talk about, like, this is why a lot of people don't like politicians. And we're talking about the authenticity issue. Most politicians aren't authentic. They really aren't. They are, because behind them are people pulling strings. They're not really themselves.
Right.
They're not really telling you what they really feel. Yeah. I really don't. They're not really also even looking out for ultimately what will be good for their constituents. They're always agenda driven with, again, they're like the person, I want to create the podcast, to make a bunch of money instead of
Yeah.
I'm one to make a podcast to provide value to people.
Right.
They've already got an agenda, an end result, and that is I want less gas-driven cars.
Right.
Regardless of the fact that we can't even keep the lights on when we have a heat wave.
Right.
We're going to put more electric cars on the road, but no means of giving those cars power.
Right.
No one's like, and I can't think that they're not dumb.
Yeah.
By the way, these people aren't dumb.
And also, don't forget, our electrical system is so ill maintained because we don't want to have higher rates that it causes fires that are so big in terms of space. I can't explain to you how, like, as big as states, our fires are burning land, and a lot of it's caused by our craving for electricity. But if you turn off the electricity for a minute to say, "Hey, we're going to go redo this area," you know, people lose their minds.
Yep.
Right. I look, I've had you for a long time, so let me just wrap this thing up. Anything in closing for you?
Yeah, I just want, well, again, thanks again for having me on your show. It's a wonderful show, and it's always wonderful to sit and have a conversation with you. It's always enlightening. I just will finish up by, I've got a new book coming out January 17th, 2023, Cries of a Dying World. It's the ebook right now is currently up for pre-order on Amazon. I think Pete's going to have a link for it. And or otherwise you can find me, check me out on gmichaelhopf.com or go to my Instagram. It's instagram.com/gmichaelhopf. I'm actually doing one Thursday every month. I'm doing Instagram Live, bringing on prominent New York Times best-selling authors, award-winning authors, and just talking about our craft. You know, so for any new authors out there that want to learn how to write, storytelling, publishing, marketing, publicity, it's a great resource for you to come and listen to two guys, two writers. There's also, I got some women coming on, sorry. Just talking about our craft. But other than that, just again, you can find me at gmichaelhopf.com.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you.